Shabbos.
I'm gonna make it tomorrow. I'm gonna clean up my car, cut all the cardboard boxes that accumulated in the basement, and get everything organized so I can survive next week. How about you? What's new?
Wow,
Getting ready for
that's,
Passover, huh?
that's wild.
You know, I abandoned, I never clean anything. I just go to my sister's house. She does all the work. I'm gonna keep that tradition. I think I will clean a little bit.
That's a good call.
Doing a remodel, I'm cleaning the whole place. Like everything's, you know,
Is
20
it a
years.
condo?
Yeah, my condo. I figured, why should I remodel so someone else could benefit? I might as well do it for myself. Most people do it like, you know, so they get the place up so they can sell it for more money, you know?
Enjoy it. Are you kidding me? I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should do it to enjoy
The
it.
stock market's high, taking the profit, remodel it.
Hey, taking the profit, remodel it, and yeah, our goal is to watch like a hawk, and then when it drops by just a full point, and I'm ready for a HELOC. I'll take it out and I'll do our kitchen. But I'll watch it. Because we bought in 2021.
Or your place?
Yeah, we bought our place in 2021. We sold the condo. I would have bought that condo, but A, it's expensive, and B, everything. I don't know about your building, but the building.
What are you looking for?
Sorry, I got lost in there looking for a Stacy word. Disappeared here. That when we sold that condo, because everything structurally and internally to the building was falling apart. I would have bet very good money, bet good money that they would also lose their roof, and the plumbing was a mess, and I was worried about mold coming in. And I thought,
Yeah, I got all of that right now.
it's the worst.
Well, you know what it is it was built on the cheap.
Yeah.
And, you know, the construction thing there, so when I asked for advice, because I don't know how to do anything about the remodel, two separate people told me, whatever they tell you, it's twice as much and twice as long. So I just did that.
That they're not wrong. That it will
Well,
be.
so you get now the third validation of that concept.
Yeah.
So I already, you know.
My dad's a licensed contractor. He does wallpaper work primarily. He does other stuff too, but he really just wallpaper is his deal. And you would definitely have run that. Like everything would be twice as long, twice as much.
Yeah, so I have a new person. She interviewed 4 people and picked the one that she thought was best.
Great.
I'm her first client in her life.
Great.
And she already vetted. She graduated from Princeton, which didn't let me in. And she had like a life for 5 years before she decided I'm going to do my passion and become an interior decorator. But she was sitting at the Goldfish Pond where I hang out sometimes, at the Jackson Street Market, which you probably never been to.
The Jackson Street Market, I have.
No, not the flea market.
The street market.
Jackson Street Market, not the. It's an Italian deli on Jackson Street, Culver City.
Yeah, no, I've been there. My parents live in Culver City.
Oh, you've been in the back where the patio is and the great
bar? Yeah, where they go the fish. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was sitting there, and I was kind of a bit distressed. Like now I have good stress. That was less than good stress. I don't even remember what it was. And I said, "You mind if I sit down?" Because you know what the thing is there. Just start to be friendly.
Yeah,
and she goes, "Oh, sure, go ahead." And so, okay, that brightened my day. So nice, friendly thing. I said, "Well, I'm a curious sort of human being." I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Well, I'm taking an online course at UCLA for interior design."
So cool.
I said, "Why don't you upgrade my condo?" Well, she's been working with me since July. We already decluttered, I'd say, at least 3/4 of the place.
Yeah.
And the place looks great. She convinced me after a long 2 3 months to get rid of the armoire, which was a dinosaur. You couldn't even sell it, you know. And all of a sudden, it's a Machaya.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. So I wasn't going to do a remodel. I was just going to touch it up. And I realized the sinks don't work, probably bad plumbing, probably mold in the bathrooms, and everything else. And when she got the decorator, I said, well, I can do flooring too. So you wanted to put in some cheap thing? I said, no, I want wood. So I went and picked out all the stuff and showrooms already. For not everything, but at least the kitchen cabinets. To me, the cabinets look fine. They can refurbish it. So, you know, it all started with wanting different lighting, which now
also, you're gonna get twice the amount of ideas as you go along.
Oh,
than
yeah,
when you
yeah.
started.
Oh,
You're
no,
gonna
no,
start with one or two ideas,
she's
and it's like,
she's
you get
smart.
so many great ideas.
She's smart because she's bringing me along the path.
Yeah.
And twice we matched. One on vanity, which just by accident,
Yeah.
and two, I said I want some prints up, and I collected Chagall calendars, and so it was like literally 40 potential
Yeah.
ones. I said, why don't you pick two and I'll pick two, and we matched on one of them.
That's really cool.
Isn't that really?
You've got yourself a gem there with this person.
Well, I got myself a 27-year-old who's never going to forget that her first customer let her do it.
That's so sweet. I love that.
It's a great story, isn't
You're
it?
an investor. It's a great story.
Yeah. Well, to be continued.
To be continued, we went back after 5 Lucy Green.
How are you today? When you show up, I know you're reading the Torah.
I show up sometimes.
So I hope you get a minion so you could do that.
I don't think so. People
Well, you know what I tell people in Spanish? Look at the spread for food.
No, I'm invited.
I said, menos burros, más elote. You know what that means in
You
Spanish?
always say that.
What?
You always say that.
Oh, you remember?
Yes, sure.
What does it mean?
Well, I don't like it too much.
I'm going to tell you, it says, less donkeys, more corn for each one.
There you go.
Huh? I hope it doesn't rain too hard.
It is, it was.
I got 3 leaks and it didn't come.
Oh, it's the worst.
It's all right. There was hardly any water. When it was the real bad storm, it was like an inch, and my neighbor had 10 buckets, like 5-pound buckets. Poor guy. So when someone tells you that, my 1 inch didn't bother me so much.
Giving
Well,
you,
the old story
giving you
about the
some
rabbi-
perspective.
You heard the story, famous story about the rabbi with a couple who said it's too crowded with the kids, and they told them all to bring all the animals.
I was just thinking about that story. In theory, I think I do that
I
every.
use that story.
I think I do it every Purim to myself. I crowd my office and say, "Oh, everybody, just dump your stuff in there, no problem." And then Purim ends. All the costumes go away. All the decorations go away. All the stuff that's thrown around my room, and all of a sudden, my office is huge and
I
spacious.
use that quote in my non-Jewish world and mention it's a story about a rabbi. You didn't hear a story about the rabbi?
Which one? There are many stories about Rabbi.
Well, you heard this one, where a couple complained and said, Rabbi, my house is, I've got 6 kids in one room, I'm going nuts. He told them, well, do me a favor, bring in the cow. But later it says, it's horrible. Bring in the goat. Back again. All right, we got the cow, we got the goat, I'm going nuts. Bring the chickens in. A week later, or week 3. And later, comes back again, he goes, take all the animals out. Rabbi, there's so much space.
Well, I do that with life. You know, whenever bad things happen, I always think there's worse. So I was
Yeah.
visiting a friend who was complaining, and
See, I don't live in a thing where, in my world,
Those of us who read a lot of
you know,
books.
there's one way of looking at it. I look at all these flipping buses.
yeah,
Just
that's
enjoy.
what I do.
We can
I mean,
bring them in
you
here.
don't have choice. If you complain, you will be more miserable. It's
Well,
better.
Abraham Lincoln,
Just like that.
you know, the guy
Me
that
too.
I love that.
should be on the.
I noticed you're not on the trip to the Balkans.
I'm
Happiness
going to
is
be
a
going,
choice.
to the Balkans.
He
with
suffered.
Joseph
You know, his history, he
in,
lost a
the end of May.
kid, his
I
wife
had
was crazy,
mentioned,
he had problems.
It's not convenient for
He had
me right
reasons,
now
I
to
think
be
he
in
had
the
2 kids
Balkans.
now.
I have a
Like me.
family member that was hospitalized and all that.
You can
It's
say
not
that.
convenient for me.
Well,
But I'm not the only one that didn't go this time, and there are people that didn't go.
Well,
this
actually,
time
when
that
those
went this
things
time.
happen,
I just noticed because I know
you don't have
how
any
much you enjoy
choice. You
going on
don't have
those
any
trips.
power. So
Yeah,
You
I
just
like,
do the
I like
best you
how
can in
studying
Yeah.
Judaism.
it's
and-
not so long. It's maximum is
Chasing it around the
120.
world.
But
And
I
can do that.
still feel people
There you
that
go.
work in the income tax industry, this is their heaviest time. A lot of our members do work in the income tax industry. It's not convenient for them to go in the month of March.
It's true. It's a hard time. Yeah.
So I brought this up to them also.
1, 2, 3,
Well,
4.
Every year is a new
Oh,
chance
Lord.
to.
Joseph
friends who used to go outside and
West
The schlepper,
Philadelphia.
yeah,
He
I,
conducts trips
I actually
to,
was walking on a
the
side
Balkans
street,
and to Romania
and,
and to,
a person came out, I need a minion, I
that
went.
whole area. He
But you know,
conducts
the
those
jokes,
trips.
we like
Right,
the jokes.
on the way back to Pico
And,
Robertson, brother.
I've known people who have
We
gone
like
up
the
and they've
jokes,
enjoyed his
so,
trips.
And then actually, when a couple
To,
people
you
came
know,
and
to
said,
Greece and,
you
you know,
go.
to places like
he had
Corfu,
a
Greece
friend,
and places like
who
that.
looked
No, I didn't know who it was.
no, I'm saying a joke.
gonna
It's
try
not a
this
joke,
this
it's a
year.
true story.
But,
Um,
you know, I
he
cannot
looked
walk.
like,
Long,
you could say
whatever.
he's Jewish or
And
he's
I,
something
you know, look
else.
at pictures
So
and
he
look at
was
people that were
standing
there
in front
last year,
for
and
the
look at people that were there last year and aren't there this year,
bus
you know, it's like,
station.
I can't hear too much noise.
So he was staying at
you
bus
have a good
station
ear for
to
sound.
go
And I
to
think
college.
the
And
sanctuary
normally in
the
France,
farm
Chabad
next
sometimes
to it
take
were not
van
built with
and they go
acoustics
ask
in
people to
mind.
put the
I
kid
think
in
Oh,
they
yeah,
have
yeah.
an acoustics
And so they stop on the bus station and they catch the guy and they say, have you put the kid in this morning? No. Okay, put it. And they say prayer, everything. And he was not very religious, so he did it. And then after they finished, suddenly they realized that they're Jewish or
It was almost immediately obsolete.
he was Jewish, but
And now it's not the system anyone uses. I'll give you a simple example. We
but
built it
our
in
synagogue was
2019,
in neighborhood,
before
so
everyone was
we
being
would go knock the
monitored,
doors,
so
take the
all
guy from
modern.
bed and
And
wait
it's
for
not
him.
intuitive or built into
My
the
husband
system.
would
It's
say
just
always,
just
no,
not
no,
there.
you
So we're always
you
kind of
start exactly
hacking
at
it and
time.
trying to
They
use it
know
in
you're gonna
ways that
start,
was
so they will
designed to
come.
be used.
If you
So
go to
it's
that, they will always
the
wait
issue
for
is
you.
with the audio design, the
And
equipment
I always
for
do like that. When I
amplification,
have a
there are
meeting, I
two
start
systems
exactly
happening at
on
the same
time.
time. There's the
Oh, I'm
one
never
that's
late
plugged in
also.
the table
There's
and the
an
wireless mics.
English
Those are
saying,
two completely
the
different
early
systems
bird
that are
gets
kind
the
of messing
worm.
each other up, and
Yeah.
you hear things a little funny. We're working
Yeah,
on
Even
that
if
part.
there's
No,
no
The,
work,
the,
it's
the
your,
construction of it was
you need to be
brilliant,
on time.
but it was
so.
meant to be
Well,
amplified
there's
well,
people,
and the amplification is
personalities
not
like
working.
mine,
Like,
both
we're having
and
a
yours,
hard
are
time.
always early
You're
and
not
on
alone in
time.
having a hard time
And
hearing
there's
it.
people who are
yeah,
always
not
late.
alone.
Yeah.
I had one
By
guy
far.
almost was late to his
Yeah.
wedding, a friend of mine. He's like, oh, I
Okay,
tell him anytime I
I
need
hope we
something,
get
I tell
a
him a
minion.
half hour
It's
early.
tough on a rainy day.
And he'll come.
Yeah, I do that with some friends, but I know they will be late.
Yeah. It's a personality thing, you know, I don't get upset. People are always early, like me and her, and there's people are always late. It's everything.
Yeah.
Very rarely is citizen who's, you know, on time late. And very rarely is someone who's late on time.
People
Watch.
have a way of relating to time like that. I agree.
What else am I gonna do on a rainy Saturday night if not go to a movie? What am I doing?
That's what I'm hoping 3 more people say.
Three
What
or
else am I
four.
gonna do?
I don't
4.
wanna go to see a lousy movie. I've seen enough lousy movies in my lifetime. I mean, what am I gonna do?
Why don't they count people that
People say, why do I go? It's the food. I don't have to make a meal. Shit, I mean, that's worth a half hour, an hour of time. I'm
Yes.
telling you the truth.
I love it. Yeah.
And you notice, I've been to Reformed congregations, it's conservative and Orthodox congregations all over the country, like where I was. And around the time when the food is served, that's when the most people are there.
That's right.
I'm not the only one who comes for the food, everyone
But
comes.
you know, in old time, in the
Oh,
church,
yeah,
it was when
no,
you
it's the truth. If you're gonna have a meeting of any kind, even not a meeting, a meeting of any kind, bring in some food and more people come.
Yeah.
I mean, the Jewish war veterans, of which I'm a member, I'm a Jewish war veteran, they know that. They know that. They don't have anything unless they have food.
I agree.
But I'm like you. I've been to services around the country myself. I enjoy attending services around the country.
Good.
I do enjoy it.
I get jealous when people say that. I can never go to other
I've
services.
been
I'm
to
stuck.
all 50 states. I've been in all 50 states. I haven't attended
That's so cool.
services in all 50 states, but I can tell you, Little Rock, Arkansas has 3 synagogues, and Jackson, Mississippi has a nice synagogue. And I mean, I've been to synagogues in various parts of, you know, gosh, Providence, Rhode Island has very nice synagogues. Bangor, Maine has 3 synagogues, which surprised me. Bangor, Maine, 3, an Orthodox, conservative, and a Reform.
That's great.
That
Yeah.
little town,
Little towns even, yeah. Well, in
Like in Hong Kong.
in service of
in Hong Kong. Yeah, I did.
Hold on, speaker.
Oh,
I am.
service of making sure we can say our Amidah on time, I have to get us started and hope that we get several more. I see at least one person coming in.
I'm rooting
So,
for you, Rabbi.
well, yeah. Hi, Joey. All right, we're gonna get started. We're on page 214. Page 214. אשרי שבביתך עוד יהללוך צבא, השם שככה לו, השם שאדוני אלוהיו תהילה לדוד.
It's not the same book.
What, 226?
Yeah, the Slim Shalom, yeah.
Oh, didn't know, thank you.
Cool.
תהילת אדוני ידבר פי, ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברך ים יתהווה עד עולם, הללויה, ובא לציון כהן שבי ושביע קוראים אדוני. את הקדוש יושב תהילות ישראל, וקרא אל זה ואמר, קדוש 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 אדוני צבאות, ולא כל ארץ כבודו. ותישאני רוח ושמע אחרי כל רעש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו תלתך. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני. ויבטחו בך יהודי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה וידיר. I will be right back. I'm checking to see if we have anyone walking in. If not, then we're going to have to read from a book. I know.
This is when each one of us is precious. We really count them. When we don't have enough people. We are so precious.
That's right.
We count. Yeah. We
Well,
matter.
I see no signs, no new cars, and I don't see people walking in. So I think we're going to have to have you read it from a book, which disappoints me, and I'm sorry. But here we go. I'm just assuming you're reading.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was just, Rosemary's like, why are you telling me? No, Rosemary's going to read for us. Okay. So
Telling me that I will read.
we're going to hear Rosemary chant for us Parshat Shemini, the very beginning of the Parsha. And unfortunately, we're going to hear it from a book, which means no honors around it. But fortunately, we still get to hear it read. All right. You'll come up and read for us?
Shall I put Tully?
Your name is
No, you don't have to. That's
Rosemary? Your name is Rosemary? Oh, I didn't know.
Oh.
No, I didn't know.
No, you don't have to. It's okay. I'm still reading from a book.
So what is your Hebrew name?
Yeah, what is your Hebrew name,
What is your
Rosemary?
Hebrew name, Rosemary?
My real name is Rosemary. My
No, your
mom-
Hebrew name.
Oh, Ruth.
Root.
Oh.
Yeah, she was asking what your Hebrew name was.
Because my mom said it was just called Rosemary, I love you. Janet McDonald Nelson Eddy. I don't know them, but that's what it was. So she
That's
said,
lovely.
I wasn't in plan. They said if they have a daughter, they will call Rosemary. So I was always the only name
I love
in the
that.
class, every part.
Okay, so we're,
I want to read it up, you know what I mean?
and will you do the blessing for study?
Oh yeah, you remind me that's
I
right.
will show you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do not remember that. Okay. It's the first two lines.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעשות בדברי תורה.
Amen. We're on page 630 in the Eitz Chaim.
ויהי ביום השמיני קרא משה לאהרון ולבניו ולזקני ישראל, ויאמר אל אהרון, קח לך עגל בן בקר לחטאת, ועיל לעולת תמימים, והקרב לפני אדוני. ואל בני ישראל תדבר לאמור, קחו שעיר עזים לחטאת, ועגל וכבש בני שנה תמימים לעולה, ושור ועיל לשלמים לזבוח לפני אדוני, ומנחה בלולב השמן. כי היום אדוני נראה עליכם, ויקחו את אשר ציווה משה אל פני אוהל מועד, ויקרבו כל העדה, ויעמדו לפני אדוני. ויאמר משה, זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני תעשו, וירא עליכם כבוד אדוני. ויאמר משה אל אהרון, קרב אל המזבח, ועשה את חטאתך ואת עולתך, וכפר בעדך ובעד העם, ועשה את קורבן העם, וכפר בעדם, כאשר ציווה אדוני. ויקרב אהרון אל המזבח, וישחט את עגל החטאת אשר לו, ויקריבו בני אהרון את הדם אליו, ויטבול אצבעו בדם, ויתן על קרנות המזבח, ואת הדם יצק אל יסוד המזבח, ואת החלב ואת הכליות ואת היותרת מן הכבד מן החטאת יקטיר המזבח, כאשר ציווה אדוני את משה. ואת הבשר ואת האור שרף באש מחוץ למחנה, וישחט את העולה, וימציאו בני אהרון אליו את הדם, ויזרקהו על המזבח סביב, ואת העולה המציאו אליו, לנתחיה ואת הראש, ויקטר על המזבח, וירחץ את הקרב ואת הקרעים, ויקטר על העולה המזבח, ויקרב את קורבן העם, ויקח את שעיר החטאת אשר לעם, וישחטהו ויחטאהו כראשון, ויקרב את העולה, ויעשיה כמשפט. Do we have to do something?
No, there's no after. I know. It feels like there should be, though, ritually. It's a little bit of a gap. But we just say Yashar Koach and Kol HaKavod for learning this, and we'll, come back on a Monday or a Thursday and hear Rosemary again. We're going to go right into the whispered private Amidah. We're on page 223. I invite you to rise and recite your own private whispered Amidah. If you haven't yet completed your Amidah, please continue at your own pace. Aleinu is on 231. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, l'tei kedula l'yotzer b'reshit shelo asanu. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. We don't have a minion at the moment in the room, so we'll skip Mourner's Cottage and end here after Aleinu. And we have a little bit of time to get a minion in the room. Yesher koach to Rosemary for chanting for us from Parshat Shmini. We're going to take a break to get some nourishment. So we've got time to eat a little bit. Hopefully we'll get one more person in here so we are able to have a minion for Mariv. And we'll do a little bit of learning in, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes. Maybe 10 minutes.
I love that we have a bookshelf in here, but it is a little bit of a journey to get it.
Well, I guess I'm looking, I just forgot to put it there. Yeah.
There's no way of knowing how many people are gonna be here.
Very handy.
Want to cut the slice and make sandwiches. So they can use the handle.
Joey's the expert.
Okay.
It's like I'm always afraid I'm gonna knock over something.
Manages his bagels.
Great.
That's how I roll.
They have, you do it everything, right now, because the other two.
I mean, Rabbi Shapiro is also on staff and doing fun things.
Oh, good,
He prepared something. And I had a wonderful time watching our rabbinic intern do his thing
Oh, good,
today,
good.
What?
reading services.
Told him.
So does it go from Shabbos Mincha to weekday services?
Kind of, yes,
Okay.
exactly. There's a, you can't vote otherwise, yes.
Yeah. That one there, can you imagine the someone like
We keep up with each other online. I was telling her, I think she messaged me the other day, or maybe I'm imagining this because I said that I went to the knockoff soup plantation that opened in Rancho Cucamonga.
Oh,
She's very excited about that.
Oh,
So,
yes.
it was my mom's birthday.
Oh,
Okay, so encourage her about that. Because you know what she like misses that she really loved it. It's a lot. So my kids.
Got it.
All right.
Yeah, so I occasionally have
It is-
memories of the intent with her.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would love her to meet my daughter Ella. I feel like they would have a lot to chat about someday. Yeah.
Nine.
I know.
much food or not enough.
Yeah.
So what she wants is a
It
relatively
depends if in the morning they have
and just to do
bar
all of her
mitzvah.
Right, yeah.
extra time to do the things she really loves, which is.
Were you there in the morning?
Yeah, the library made it into a sanctuary. There was no bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah this morning, anywhere. They just had Beitinu in here, and then library made it was in the sanctuary for tour club.
Okay.
So Frank, their little one, is right now at, a secular preschool. Preschool. And I went to public school. I came up just fine, decorating things with, and
There's a Saturday night, and I'm on with you, Minha.
and there is a Jewish school, it's Harvard. So they'll probably learn it there within a year or two, but.
Surprisingly in that area, like,
Yeah.
that's a very tough, everything's expensive choice there.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully, we're hoping to spend a good amount of time with them and with,
Oh, I know, at Berkeley. Minha,
Yeah, with Micah and Leah. Yeah, I was like, why can I only think of their kids' names?
No,
Yeah.
but see, you got me there.
Yeah. We're hoping to spend some time with them. I got a place for us in like a little bit south of San Leandro for a week. I'm on my sabbatical or something. So long summer, mostly in the Pacific Northwest. But I want to drive there and back, and I'd like to. I'm trying to finish my book, and so I want to be more quiet. And so I feel like that was where I was born in the open hills, and that's how.
What is it, what kind?
It's on minding the ritual gap, so it's teaching both like the average layperson and also maybe a clergy person who pick up the book how to identify moments, either mundane moments or moments that might have otherwise canonically been rituals, and elevate them to other rituals that are missing in the moment. Like, so everything from people who, when we talk about campaigns, like I'm a lawyer, I just lost a case after 6 months. I'm just go back to work tomorrow. Like, I can't do that. It's just, I put my life into this, and I really miss something to separate. And sometimes the answer is specifically meaningful. Like, we're gonna make fun and take a gift one time. Yeah, something
Whoa.
talk about some laughter. You okay?
Yeah, dropped my sandwich.
Yeah. Not bad. Good catch.
On the floor
And
also.
sometimes it's more complicated.
I never cared for the holidays Easter.
Last of his generation.
Historically, Jews would be killed on that holiday.
He's the last one who was surviving, and he had no kid to be able to own his siblings.
Thanks for pointing that out to me. I wiped up as much as I could.
The answer that the Jewish
Bless you with your shoes like that, Robbie.
they needed something.
Interesting.
Finding ritual gaps and teaching people that I just taught it to the class of Mohaine who trained through the Greek coach program. And for them, it's all about being able to say yes because they have to say a lot of no. You can't have a parent doing this here. No, we can't have this person holding it. No, we can't. It's a lot of no. So what yes can they?
That makes me think that, so
second home, I miss it.
Yeah.
Hope she feels that way too when she goes there enough.
I think it's good for synagogues to buy real estate, like, do they own the land? I think it's
Yeah.
good for them to own real estate.
Makes a really big difference. All right.
Hope she enjoys herself up there.
That's great.
That's, yeah. Which was Hilltop, right? What's the one? I don't
Oh,
know.
no, there's two different.
Two different? Ice cream, right?
They're the same,
Yeah.
contiguous.
Got it.
Two-
But they're two separate
Yeah,
properties.
and there's probably, when, not subdivided, but they're two quasi organizations.
Got it. That are running, yeah.
Everybody, because one has a conference center. The other,
Yeah, there are a couple places like that. It reminds me of AJU owning BCI. Or rather EBI, the Brenda Sperdine
Yeah,
property. And it's also, that's also a
that was, that was
clever choice. Okay.
It was originally just Brandeis by me.
Yeah.
Summer camp 60 years ago.
Still got a good, healthy crew of people going to Albany for summer.
Okay. Well, we're gonna learn and also put out the bulletin that, we could use one more person in person. That'll be nice. We could do Kaddish when we get there. But in the meantime, we're gonna learn a little bit about Parshat Shemini. I got kind of cute with the title. I said something's fishy because we're gonna learn a little bit about fish. I'm excited. And you happen to be eating tuna, which is a great food for this teaching. So, okay. All right. So,
We Jews eat so much tuna, we should have a monument to the tuna.
we should have a monument to the tuna. Okay, we might get there in our learning. We'll see. So, in the Torah, we have different types of rules around kashrut, around dietary laws. Sometimes those dietary laws are a list of animals that we are prohibited to eat. There are animals that no matter how you slice them, literally, you cannot eat them according to the kashrut laws, according to dietary laws. There are also rules about how one must go about doing kosher slaughter when the animal is within permissibility. And also, in addition to how one does that, how those foods need to be kept separate from dairy foods. Right? That many, many times in our Torah, we're instructed that we should not boil a kid in its mother's milk, which is to say that we learn from the Torah over and over again that somehow meat and the milk of animals should be separated from one from the other. In addition to that, there's this other category that we see in this parasha, the category pertaining to creatures that swim in the sea and bodies of water. And for those, it is neither here nor there. We are neither permitted to eat whatever and slaughter them however, nor are they a list of prohibited animals, but rather rules around how one determines whether this is a creature from the sea that can be eaten according to kashrut or not. In Vayikra, the very first source on your paper, chapter 11, verse 9, Et zeh tochlu, this you shall eat, which is to say, this you are permitted to eat. Mikol asher b'mayim, from within all that is found in the waters. So this is already setting up the category that I'm laying out for you from the beginning. There is a category of animals that you may or may not be able to eat, and the Torah is going to tell us explicitly how we know, can we eat this creature, can we not eat this creature. Kol asher lo sinapir v'kaskeset. Each that has on it, with it, somehow visible, sinapir v'kaskeset, we'll leave those untranslated for a moment, ba'mayim, in the water, bayamim uvanechalim, whether you're talking about seas or you're talking about rivers, which is to say whether you're talking about saltwater fish or you're talking about freshwater fish. And also I would say, with due reference, because you gotta laugh or also cry from the river to the sea. The idea of from river bodies to the sea may in and of itself be what's called a merism. And a merism is like when we say you should teach these words to your children from when you get up in the morning till when you lay down at night, which is a way of the Torah telling us all the time, all inclusive between those 2 points. So it may be pertaining to that, it may not. That's not what we're going to get into for today, but you should understand that they're not saying, oh, well, I don't see any lakes listed here, so obviously we can only eat animals that are in the Great Sea, which is like a salty body of water, or in a river. Instead, it's more of a categorical and inclusive phrase. So whether it's salt water or fresh water, otam tochelu, those are the ones you can eat. We're going to use Rashi's translation from the 11th to 13th century to understand what sinapir and kaskaset are. Sinapir, according to him, are elu sheshat bahem. This is what the fish uses to floofy itself around, to go back and forth, to swish swish. Well, it's the swish swish. It's fins of some order, right? It's got to have fins on some order. And kaskeset, what is that? Elu klipin hakevu imbo kemoshene emar. This verse from Shmuel. Veshiron kaskasim hu lavush. These are the things that have little scalies that are attached to it, affixed to it, as it says in the book of Samuel, and then uses a garment that human beings wear, which I can only picture. It's really chainmail, but I'm picturing fabulous sequins because that's the only thing I can picture when I think of a giant scaly outfit. They're really probably talking about a chainmail, right? That was what he was wearing, and he was clothed in a scaly coat of mail, which is to say, kaskeset, like the thing that we see on a fish. You can learn what one Hebrew word means from another biblical word. Sometimes it's a stretch, sometimes it's not. Here they say, what are we talking about when we're talking about the thing on the clothing? We're talking about little scaly bits. So it's like it's an internal to the Torah definition and understanding. It's not just Rashi, as he sometimes say, the laws in the local language, like in French. This is what we call X, Y, and Z, and you just sort of have to trust Rashi. He says, no, we actually use this word throughout the Bible, and when we use it, we're referring to scaly little bits of things. Okay, so, can we eat fish? What's the answer to that question?
Not if it's shrimp or clams or oysters.
The answer is sometimes. It depends on the fish. So a yes and no. Yes, we can sometimes eat fish, but it depends on the type of fish. The Sefer HaChinuch, which is this early-ish medieval long letter-formed Spanish communication between a father and son, ostensibly. It was like writing an ethical will that was ultimately used by the Jewish people. It's considered a work of halacha, of Jewish law. The Sefer HaChinuch, when he outlines this commandment, what he gets stuck on is something fascinating, which is whether or not it's considered a mitzvah to eat kosher fish. So when he goes to pick it apart, he says, Livdok b'simanei dagim, to check the mitzvah berikat simanei dagim. Pausing on this for a second, the way that the Sefer HaChinuch is organized is pertaining to every mitzvah that's found in each parasha in order of the phrase or the word to which that can be attributed or that it's hooked upon. And this is according to the counting of Maimonides. So he uses the Maimonidean accounting of the positive commandments. But something weird happens here. He says, as for this checking of the signs of the dagim, the fish, Livdok b'simanei dagim kelomar, sheharotze le'echol min hadagim, that is to say that the one who wishes to eat from the species of fish, sheyivdok techila bahen, that they should first check in it, that is the creature, yafeh, check well, hasimanim shenatna hatorah bahen, the characteristics that the Torah ascribed to fish, vehen, and what are those characteristics that we're checking? Sinapir v'kaskeset. Sinapir v'kaskeset, okay. So what does maybe the Sefer HaChinuch think is the mitzvah in regards to eating fish? Is it that it's a mitzvah to eat fish? No. Is it that it's a negative mitzvah, that you should not eat fish? No. He makes the mitzvah to do with the category that this is in. It's not that you can eat it depending on how it's slaughtered or you're not permitted to eat the thing. He says that the mitzvah is to do the checking. And then he gives us this verse, Shene'emar, the one that we just read, Et zeh tochlu mikol asher b'mayim v'chulei. This verse that we just read in Vayikra that tells us that. Kevar, katavnu b'mitzvah hakodemet lazo. We already wrote in the last mitzvah about this. And he's going to say what the this is, Shehar Ramban, that Nachmanides, who comes after our friend who delineated all the mitzvot that the Sefer HaChinuch is relying on, Zichro no livracha, may his memory be for a blessing, Lo yachshov b'minyan hamitzvot b'dikat simanim b'minim shehitira haTorah. That Ramban, the Nachmanides, not to be confused with Rambam, did not, what's minyan? What's the minyan? Well, what's minyan? What's minyan? It's a gathering, but how many? 10. Okay, so what do we do when we want to make sure, like right now, when I look around the room, what am I doing? What's a minyan? It's the counting. Okay, so when he accounted for all of the mitzvot, which he was trying to get to, let's be honest, he was trying to get to those 613 and going from the number 613 and figuring out which one was counted within that. How do you divide them up? There is a significant amount of conflict isn't the word I'm looking for, disagreement on paper between rabbinic authorities as to which count in the 613 and which don't. Ramban says, this isn't a mitzvah. You're making it up, Maimonides. Very cute that I'm adding words to his words, but it's lovely that you think that this could be a mitzvah because, of course, we are required to check, but he doesn't see it as a mitzvah. Because, and he goes on to explain this, we're not going to pick apart the entire piece from Sefer HaChinuch, but he basically says that you can find in the Gemara, and he gives this example from Chulin, from the Gemara, that they say this is a positive commandment, or this is a negative commandment, and then give some examples of places where that shows up and it doesn't show up here, and therefore, it's not a commandment. So we don't even really have a commandment in regards to eating fish or not eating fish. What we have, I mean, there are other bits to consider, but based on this, it's not necessarily a command. And what might you extrapolate from that? What does that mean for fish and for the eating of fish? Is it a command? Why is it not a mitzvah? How could it be that we don't have a mitzvah when it comes to eating kosher fish or not? That's the number one response to this is that in an ideal world, and we do not live in an ideal world, but in an ideal world, that there's sort of rungs on a ladder of how one ought to be choosing the foods that they eat. And at the highest, most rung of that ladder, you have the version of eating that was commanded to people before the flood and immediately after, right? The Noahide laws, the rules that were set in place, which seem to outline God's preference, God's strong preference, that in a world where we don't need to eat animals, we don't eat animals. So you might come to say that we shouldn't be commanded to eat fish because we don't have to eat fish. Also, what happens if you live in Iowa? I guess Iowa has rivers and lakes and things like that. What happens if you live in the middle of a large stretch in what we now call Nevada, right? Right, you get your meat from Minneapolis, right? You may or may not, in the world of the Sefer HaChinuch, have had access to fish. And therefore, what's the problem? If you have a commandment that's listed in the Torah that requires you to check fish,
Well, what if, like right now, sometimes salmon, fishermen can't get salmon, they can't even eat, somehow, it's hard to get fish. But
right?
here's the thing, in the animal kingdom, animals eat other animals to survive.
Sure.
You know, so every time when I hear people say they're vegetarians because they don't want to eat animals, but animals eat other animals
Right.
to survive.
And the Torah isn't asking you personally or any one of us to imagine that we shouldn't eat animals. I want to be clear about that. That I don't think that the rabbinic interpretation says, and therefore we should all be vegetarians. I think that they actually see us in the form of many different things that take place in the Torah as not living on the human plane in the ideal order of things. In this version of humanity, we eat animals. We do. And that's why we have all these rules around what we can eat and not eat, because we do eat those animals. And this is just imagining from God's perspective, well, we probably don't want to command people to eat animals. I think the more catchy reason here, I'm going to keep throwing in fish related jokes. The more catchy reason here is that we do our best not to assign mitzvot that cannot be acted upon, even the mitzvot, and I'll come to your comment, even the mitzvot that pertain to the temple, we are still teaching, and these are hundreds and hundreds of years after the temples were destroyed. Sefer HaChinuch concerns itself with whether or not we should understand if the temple were in order, here would be our commandment. So even in that universe, it's possible that we might come across. I think that's Rambam's reasoning, by the way, is if you're eating fish, then this mitzvah exists. Anyway, you had a thought.
I was gonna say that, out of the fish, you can't slaughter that meat that's not kosher. You can't tell when you catch the fish until you check the scales.
Great.
Can you, what do you, can you set out to catch fish without making sure the only fish you catch are the ones with scales? The answer
Right.
is practically no, you can't.
Right. Can you practically determine the kashrut, the dietary fitness of a fish before you catch it? The answer is no, particularly if you want to use the image, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, of a net, not a fishing rod with a hook. Because you're scooping up a substantial number of fish, and then from that, you have fish that slip out and escape. You have fish that are not kosher with it, and then you may also have fish that are. And so it's true also that the checking is really only post facto. And so there's what to be considered there as well. I like that. Rosemary, and then we're going to move on.
Well, I think nowadays it's easier because most of the fish is farm raised. So they have the farm, they have like any kind of fish you
Right.
can choose.
So,
The problem for me sometimes I think like in France, people buy in the markets, not always kosher seller, but the fresh fish which come from the ocean. And some fish they don't have a scale, so you don't know what they are. I mean, like you said, it's a fish which looks fish, but it doesn't have scale. So clearly they bring it. How do you know how was the fish? You have to
Right.
trust the salesperson or just find the kosher butcher
Right.
or fish seller.
So Rosemary brings up two issues. One of those issues is what happens in a universe where fish are being farm raised, and then therefore you know from the start. And then two is, of course, when you go to a marketplace and you can't necessarily tell by the way that the fish looks sitting there on ice or whatever, ideally, you can't tell necessarily if it's the kosher fish. I almost taught I shied away from, I deleted it from the sheet, but could teach another time about whether or not salmon can be considered kosher on site, because it's one of the few fish for which the flesh is determinably kosher. even without the scales on it because of the pigmentation that exists in salmon today. But that aside, what I would say is perhaps the rabbis of the medieval era and earlier would have been delighted by the idea of farm-raised fish, because then lehatchila, a priori, before you even get there, you're able to do the thing that you just told us we cannot do by catching fish. If you go out to the sea and you're trying to catch fish, you don't know yet, even before you've caught it, whether it's kosher or not. But if you are farming tilapia, if you are farming salmon, et cetera, which they did in ancient times. Is that right? Exactly. There are fish farms in Kisari. I'm just repeating things for the podcast / the people online. Exactly. And so I think that there's something to that idea, actually, picturing, right, the engineered market of fish. And it's also the case that just as with so many other things in halacha, you cannot necessarily determine the kashrut even based on the literature that was in our that we were sharing with one another, the oral Torah of 600 by the time of the Gemara, or even by the time of the Sefer HaChinuch or Shulchan Aruch, which we'll look at in a moment, right? Even by medieval times, that's not enough, because the situation in regards to food access, among many other things, is constantly changing, which is why the matter of whether or not a food is kosher is very typically a reference to the local rabbi of the time, because food science, so to speak, and food access is constantly changing. I need to move us to the next topic. I know people have other thoughts, but I've got to move on. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time to talk about what I really want to talk about today, which is, if it's true that we can eat fish, some fish, why is it that fish are not one of the sacrificial animals that are listed? You're cheating? Okay, then I'm going to ban you from contributing until, I'm just kidding. You can contribute as much as you'd like to, honestly or not, but I'm glad you're cheating. Do you see where I'm going with this? You do see where I'm going? Okay.
I'm eager in anticipation.
Okay, great.
Keep my mouth shut from.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited to explore this. I'm bothered by the notion that fish aren't even considered by the Torah. We don't even get a rejected this fish, this you shall not bring, nothing. The fish aren't even brought up, and it clearly is on the minds of many of the rabbis who are considering what ought to be korbanot or not to be korbanot. What's the deal? Be very Seinfeldian about it. What's the deal with fish? Like, why are fish such an exceptional category? And we're going to get some reasoning about this starting on the next page, where Rosemary has a thought.
Well, I think the fish is considered in some cultures a restricted creature. So you are trying to offer to God something which is not very high quality. Secondly, fish doesn't have too much blood, but in sacrifices we're splashing blood everywhere.
Great.
You can't do that to the fish.
Great. I love those two ideas. One is that fish in some cultures are considered to be about the dumbest creatures that exist, and therefore we wouldn't utilize them for korbanot because they don't represent well. I think you're going to be surprised on the reasoning based on that thought. And two, which I love, I've never considered, as we read in this week's Torah portion, blood is an extremely vital part, literally and figuratively, of how we offer sacrifices. So fish, I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but while they're messy in the form of slaughter, so to speak, they're not necessarily bloody, and that leaves us perhaps wanting in the sacrificial system. We're going to skip right to Dina Weiss's explanation of why fish don't show up as sacrifices in this new system of Seudah Shlishit, where I am the only person who is mic'd for purposes of online, etc. I'm going to go ahead and read it, even though I would delight if someone else is reading, but I apologize you're hearing a lot of my voice. Okay, here we go. With this lens in mind, talking about what fish are and aren't utilized for, we're going to take this one paragraph at a time. We need to return to what fish represent to understand why they would be considered unfit for korbanot, that is to say, sacrifices. Just as we don't bring animals of prey Bringing up another category that we don't sacrifice, such as, let's say, vulture, scavenging type animals, so too we don't bring fish. The carnivorous animals are disqualified because they represent violence and the thirst for blood, and the fish are disqualified because they represent invulnerability. I'm going to pick it apart. She's going to spend a whole paragraph telling you what she thinks invulnerability means. And by the way, I also don't understand it on face value, Rosa, because to be invulnerable is to be untouchable, so to speak. And you can, in fact, as we have established, catch, kill, and eat a fish. So what does she mean by an invulnerability? Here's what she says. Being invulnerable is incompatible with sacrifice for two reasons. The first is that sacrifices are often brought to atone for sins. The animals and birds which are brought come to facilitate a human being's stating that they acknowledge their responsibility. Pause there for a second. When you bring a korban, with the exception of the zevach todah, the gratitude offering, the vast majority of our sacrifices are done to return a person to a less sinful state. It is an offering of something of quality and value so that we can say that we are placing on this creature a sense of apology, a sense of offering resource and value up to the divine, because we have somehow messed up or deprived the divine in the system. We have not acted as we needed to act, and therefore we're offering over this thing of value, a life force of value to atone for a sin. They understand, by they, she means the animals and the birds, but also the human beings, that they have done something wrong and have come forward to admit it. A fish sliding its way through nets and past hooks, owned by no one, hold your thought on that one, and able to avoid most threats, does not signify the taking of responsibility, and instead represents evading consequences and gestures to the ability to getting away without, quote unquote, being caught. What do we mean when we say, oh, that person, I don't know that we use this so much nowadays, but just go with me. That's a real slippery criminal. What do we mean by that when we say a slippery criminal? What? Hard to get a grasp of. Do we think of them as being held accountable? It's somebody who we can't even get to the point of holding them accountable, and it can mean many, many different things, but anybody who gets away with wrongdoing because we don't have a way to hold them accountable in the system, we don't have a proper way to catch them, so to speak, is considered slippery. And this is the thing to which Dina Weiss is referring, this idea that fish, they sort of like, even if you're farm raising fish, you know, you don't like point, for the most part, like point out, oh, that's the fish I'm going after, and then you're constantly keep your eyes on Fred the fish, and you're like, oh, I shouldn't name him. But anyway, like if you're gonna eat him, but like you don't see this one fish that's in the system and go, I'm gonna catch that someday. They wrote a whole book about that, right? So like Moby Dick is this is the exception to the rule. This idea that there are people out there who are going after one particular fish. For the most part, though, you're sort of like pulling up a net, and whoever gets caught, and there are those who are slippery. And if we were to offer a fish as a sacrifice, it is to say, this is just the one that we caught. And that somehow is not representative in the system of sacrifices of what ought to be represented by a sacrifice, which is a purposeful bringing in repentance for one's wrongdoing. But she says a second thing, which is a cousin to this, that I find even more compelling and interesting. I will see what you guys think. The second reason is that korbanot function to cement the relationship between human beings and their creator. Let's pick that sentence apart and turn it into simpler English. The reason that sacrifices, the reason that she's going to bring is that sacrifices, the job of sacrifices, is to re-strengthen or repair the relationship between God and human being. Who is in charge, God or humanity? I wish humanity was in charge. God is in charge. In other words, if we do wrong, we are accountable to God, not the other way around, unfortunately. More fortunately, what a great system to be in. So God is meant to be the Baal, the master in the relationship. God is the master. We are, and as we sing about all throughout the High Holy Days, and we are God's creatures that God is master over. In the paradigm that's set up from the very first book of the Torah, we are the masters, and the creatures of the earth, including the fish of the sea, are responsible to us. However, there's something different about fish in that system than the other animals on the earth. And I think, though she doesn't go about writing this explicitly, you can also apply it to most animals of prey. An animal which has been cared for and relies on its owner to provide for it. An animal which understands what it means. The animal understands what it means to belong to someone else is fitting for a sacrifice. What's the word that we use to describe animals nowadays that fall into this category? Oh, pets is interesting. I want you to imagine for a second that you live on 50 acres in Minnesota. Do you only have pets, or do you perhaps have other creatures that belong to you?
Yeah, cows.
What do we call those animals? Livestock. Okay, great, and that's sort of their purpose. I would say the general category that we're probably talking about, I'm being very Socratic here, but I'm trying to get out the word domesticated. Okay, domestic. What does domesticated mean?
They live with humans.
They're tamed. You allow them to live with you. Some people even sleep with them. You cuddle them on your lap all the time, that kind of stuff. Actually, no, there are people that do have fish in their homes. They have fish tanks.
You could have a domesticated. I agree. I think this does not account for, like, my first fish was Perpy, the betta fish. I think this does not account for it. I agree. Yes. And domesticated animals are those animals which, as she points out, understand to a certain degree, even if their understanding is just, this is the place where those humans give me food in a bowl. That's a domesticated animal that understands a belonging to a someone else. And that it's that categorically which makes a creature fitting for being offered. She goes on to say, relationships are built and strengthened by the acts of caring for one another. A carefree fish, setting aside the fish who might live in your fish tank, who I don't know if they're carefree or not, does not have its needs provided for by humans. A fish does not represent the vulnerability required for a deep and lasting relationship. A fish doesn't stay to care and be cared for, and a fish is always swimming away. Now listen, do I think that there are exceptions to this rule? Of course there are. There are actually full-on historical court cases of relationships that people had with sea creatures, okay? We have so many stories individually and in our families of little creatures, whether it was the hermit crab, again, not kosher, but I'm pointing out what it means for a creature of the sea to have a relationship with a human being. I think that there are plenty of examples. You could also go back to Moby Dick, but those are the exceptions to the category of fish. Fish are invulnerable in that they cannot be guaranteed to be caught in the way that if you are keeping livestock, you can. Whether or not you want to bring them to slaughter is another story, but if you want to bring one of your livestock to slaughter, you can do that because you are the master and they are the creature. We are never, according to Dina Weiss's understanding, and I like where she goes with this, we're never completely the master of a fish. So it's actually, I would say, Rosemary, somewhat the opposite, to a certain degree, of the notion that fish are the dumbest creatures that can be. It's not exactly the opposite. It's saying something different. It's saying fish are the masters of their own domain. We are not actually their masters. And because they're the masters of their own domain, whatever salty or unsalty water they might be in, we don't offer them as sacrifices in the same way. Now, lest you think that this is a lone that this is a lone voice on the notion of what does and does not matter in the relationship between fish and human being. What she points out in addition are a series of sources that we're going to end our learning with about fish and the way that the Torah itself and that the Tanakh, the bigger biblical canon, acknowledges fish as a metaphorical and relational creature to the human being. How do we think of the fish according to the Torah? I'm going to go back to something that I said in the beginning. It's one thing for Rashi to come along and say, oh, kaskeset, that means X. It's another thing for Rashi to say, oh, kaskeset, well, if you look in the book of, what do we say, Shmuel, then you see that this is what's used as reference. Using similar reasoning, we're going to look at the way that fish and human beings are portrayed one to the other. So we're looking at Brachot 28. This is a piece from the Babylonian Talmud, from Brachot, the very first tractate as we enumerate them. The 20th page, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina Amar Mehacha. So, Rabbi Yossi, he happened to be the son of Rabbi Chanina, but he said in the name of Rabbi Chanina. That's a funny translation. V'yedgu larov b'kerev haaretz. Is it familiar? We use it in our liturgy all the time. What is yidgu larov b'kerev haaretz? Ma dagim shebayam. That the yidgu, which we say is a multiplication, is a reference to the dagim, the fish, shebayam. Mayim mechasin alehan, ve'ein ayin hara sholetet bahem. Just like those fish that are in the sea, water covers them, and there is no ayin hara, there's no evil eye that has sholetet bahem, that, like we were saying, kind of has a dominion over them. Af zaro shal Yosef, ein ayin hara sholetet bahem. So, and thusly, did the seed of Joseph, as in us, which is an interesting thing to refer to. I don't have the time to pick apart why we're saying the seed of Joseph and not another reference to who Bnei Yisrael are, the Israelites. The evil eye also has no dominion over who? Just like the evil eye has no dominion over fish, it has no dominion over the Jewish people. So because the fish somehow are free from the evil eye, because they have the cover of the water, the image here is that we, too, as Bnei Yisrael, have a kind of covering, alike or akin to the waters of the sea, covering us and protecting us from ayin hara, which isn't literally an evil eye, but rather a sense of cursedness in the universe. Habakkuk, looking at the book of our prophet, sorry, usually I try to stay in chronological order of sources. Habakkuk is clearly hundreds and hundreds of years before Brachot, so my apologies. So this reference that is going to somewhat explain the piece in Brachot, V'ta'aseh adam kidgei hayam. You've made humanity like what? The fish of the sea. Karemes lo moshelbo. Like creeping things, like the crawly things on the earth, that's also like the snakes of the earth, that have nothing that rules over them. Kulo b'chacha he'ala, yigorehu b'chermo, v'yasfehu b'michmarto, al kein yismach v'yagil. God has fished them all up with some sort of a fishing line, pulled them up into a type of a dragging netting, and gathered them all up in sort of this divine net. That is why al kein yizabeach lechermo. That's why he sacrifices to this trawl, this collective. V'kater lamich marto ki vahema shamein chalko umachalo b'yira. And he makes offerings to that net, because through these, the person who makes the offering, their portion is rich and their nourishment is like the fat of creatures. The real proof in this text is just the notion that there is a one-to-one metaphor offered by Habakkuk, that who are we like? We are like the fish of the sea, which is to extend an answer to the question, why don't we sacrifice fish? Because they are, according to our prophet Habakkuk, our likeness in this world as creatures. Our likeness as this world of creatures, therefore makes us uncomfortable to offer them as sacrifices. Two last texts and we'll end. from Avodah Zarah, another place in the Talmud, Rabbi Yehuda says that Shmuel says, what is the meaning when it is written in Habakkuk, that text that we looked at, and makes people as the fish of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them? Why are people, Lama nimshalu b'nei adam kidgei hayam? Why are people compared to the fish of the sea? This just goes to say to you, just as with regard to the fish of the sea, once they arise onto dry land, they die immediately, so too is it with people. But what can we not live without? You would think that's what they would say, but no. Here we get the real spiritual answer to the question, as opposed to a practical answer to the question. We cannot live without words of Torah and mitzvot, because those die, because those who do not have it die immediately. I'm going to pause at that and not offer the other explanation because we're out of time to do so, but I'll just say the Torah loves to compare Torah itself to water. We cannot go without water. And I think that that's pretty apt because this is not your only place, but there are many, many, many sources which will tell us. For example, we don't go 3 days without hearing Torah chanted. Why? Because a human being cannot go 3 days without water. The notion is we actually do dry up, so to speak, spiritually without that water. And now we're going to look at one final explanation from Avodah Zarah. This is from the next page. We're skipping over the little piece as a continuation of it. Another thing, Devar Acher, Ma Dagim Shabayam. Just as in the case of the fish of the sea, any fish that is bigger than another swallows the other, this is also the case for humanity. Were it not for the fear of the government, anyone who is bigger than another would swallow the other. Forget about the political commentary for a second. It's a commentary on human nature, that the nature of humanity is just as one big fish swallows a smaller fish, the bigger, stronger human being will swallow up, when given the opportunity, the next smaller one. And this, they say, is why we learned in Avot that Rabbi Hanina, the deputy high priest, would say one should pray for the continued welfare of the government, as were it not for fear of the government, every person would ish et re'ehu chayim bla'o, would swallow up the life of the next person. So, the we would drown in water. And that's why the comparison is not to what happens with us in water, but rather humanity and Torah. So the takeaway from this, from the notion of why we can eat fish, but we don't sacrifice fish, from my perspective, is not because fish fall into this category of such an undesirable creature that we would never deign them to be fit for our consuming them, rather offering them up as a sacrifice. They're not perfect enough, for example, or there are too many blemishes, all the other reasons that could be brought, but rather because we are too alike to fish and fish are too alike to us. And what I love about this explanation is that it's both the case that there is a positive connotation, the notion that we are like the fish of the sea because we are protected from the evil eye, just as the fish are also somewhat protected by the water that's all around them, but also that human beings have the power to slip away and not get caught in their sins, and also to swallow one another up when they are given enough power and enough authority. So the next time that you're considering a fish, I hope that you have an opportunity to consider how the fish are like you and how you are alike to the fish, and why that might be the reason why dagim are not a part of the sacrificial system. Shabbat Shalom. What fun learning about something fishy of Parshat Shemini. Oh, the back. As a fish eater, this was interesting. That's the best review I've gotten in a long time. Okay, great. We're going to move on to Ma'ariv. I'm just going to put out a plug here if anybody is following along on Zoom and you feel like you're close enough to us, or you know someone who's close enough to us that they can come and help us make Ma'ariv. There's at least one person I know who would like to be able to say Kaddish. That would be lovely. Otherwise, we're going to move on to Ma'ariv in our Siddur, and we'll do it Yachid for the moment. We'll do it as if we're individuals, but doing it collectively. So we'll start together, but skip over things like the Baruch Hu. Yes, sorry. Let's leave a moment for Birkat. Did anyone have bread besides Joey? Oh, you had bread. Okay, right. So let's do Shir HaMalud and a Zimun, and then we'll move on to Ma'ariv. Yeah. Lo b'shuva Adonai Thank you, Joey. He knew who could call me mine. He knew who will show me Nurina. All right, Joey, will you please lead a zimun for those who ate, and then we're going to go quiet after that first paragraph.
Baruch Shechal Mishelo Tuvo, Chayinu, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Hazan et haolam kulo betuvo, Bechein bechesed ubrachamim, Hu notein lechem lechol basar, Ki leolam chasdo, Utuvo hagadol, Tami l'chasar lanu, ve'ayachsar lanu, Ma'azon l'olam va'en, Bavur shemo hagadol, Kiwelzan and farnes l'akol, Umeitiv l'akol, Umeichin mazon, L'chol beriotav asher bara, Baruch atah Adonai, Hazan et hakol l'Elkanai.
Okay, as people are wrapping up their Birkat Hamazon, I invite you to turn to page 264 towards the back of the Lev Shalem Sidor. We'll begin at the top of the page and then continue with the larger paragraph below. We'll do this for now until more or less we get a 10th. We'll do this Kiyachid again, which means that we'll do it skipping the parts that require a minion, and I'll call pages as we go along. So we start at the top of 264. Adonai Hoshea Melech Yaneinu Yom Koreinu Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Ma'avir Yom U'Mevi Layla Ma'avdil Bein Yom Ve'in Layla Adonai Tzvaot Shemo El Chai V'Kayem Tamidim Lo Chalinu Olam Va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Mariva Ravim. Yavatechal tasir mimenu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. El Melech Ne'eman Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Baruch. Ani Adonai Elohechem Emet. Bottom of 266. B'munah kol zavekei malinu ki hu Adonai Eloheinu ve'in suatam. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל אחד שירה בשמחה רבה ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות אספלך מלכותך ראו בניך בגויים לפני משה זה לינו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כבוד אדוני יעקב Gildo miad chazak, mimeinu baruch atah Adonai, ka Yisrael. Lashkivi Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom. Ushmor tziteinu v'einu l'chaim, v'shalom me'etzavi ha'olam, baruch atah Adonai, shomer ha'mo Yisrael ad. 268. Ki hamalchut shelechahi ulamei hatimlach v'chavod Yilad melech elad tabaruch atah Adonai Hamelech bichodo tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed Ve'el kol masav. We continue now with the whispered private Amidah for the end of Shabbat, the beginning of the new week. If you are in a Siddur other than Lev Shalem, in Lev Shalem we're on 270. If you're in a different Siddur, please don't forget to add what is clearly added in the first paragraph of the Amidah in Lev Shalem, the special insertion for the end of Shabbat, and we're on 270 in Lev Shalem. As you complete your private Amidah, we turn to page 279. If you'd like to, you can be seated. We're in the middle of the page. Ukraine, Himene, Huimano, Hivitzarach, Alisehu, Yakudehu, Hemi must be who be Rehu Ishuati, or Hemi must be who Berehu Ishuati. We turn back to page 216, the second little paragraph on the page. If you're in a different Sidor, it should be on the following page rather than turning back in the Sidor. V'eta kadosh shevti lo Yisrael, v'kares el ze ve'amar, kadosh, 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 and it's V'tisleni ruach v'shmachorai kol rahashkato baruch kavod Adonai mimekomo Adonai himloch leolam va'ed. V'yivtechu v'cha yudei shemecha ki lo hasavta doreshecha Adonai Adonai chafetz l'mahan tzidko yagdil Torah v'yadir. I invite you to rise. We're on page 281. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol l'tikru l'adli v'sereishi shelo asanavi. Kakatu v'toratech Adonai himloch le'olam va'ed v'nehemar v'haya Adonai l'melech ha'kol ha'aretz v'yom ha'hu yihi Adonai echad u'shmo echad. That's the conclusion of our service, at least it is, in terms of not having a minion here in the room, unfortunately, which means that we have to conclude with Havdalah rather than Kaddish. We'll do that in just a moment. I want to remind everybody, tomorrow may be another rainy-ish day, I don't know, but we could really use a minion. And at 8 a.m. tomorrow, we have daily minion here. And I believe, is it tomorrow night? Does anyone remember offhand that we move to 7 p.m.? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. I'm being Mike Harris for a moment. We move finally to the parking spot for our late-ish minyan for the rest of the season, 7 p.m. starting tomorrow evening for Mincha, followed by Mariv.
It is usually the evening minions that they have problems getting enough food.
It's true, generally speaking, it's true that we have more trouble in the afternoons. We have a few people who are traveling and away, which is partially why we're a little slim tonight, which means that we could probably also use in the morning, but yes, the evening especially. In just a moment, we'll turn to Havdalah. Oh, thank you. Yes. Okay, that will be how we cover our last 2 minutes. We're going to sing Hatikva, page 448 in the Sidor. Kol hod balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homiha ulefate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia, on lo avda tikvateinu, I tikva b'shnot alpayim, li'otam echovshi, li'artzenu eretz Zion Yerushalayim. Li'otam chofshi, li'artzenu eretz Zion Yerushalayim. Yanai nanai nai nai nai, yanai nanai nai yanai. Yanai nanai nai nai nai, yanai nanai nai 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 nai, nai nai. Yai nai nai, yai nai nai, yai nai nai, oh. Yeshuati, Eftach velo Efchad. Ki ozi v'zi Adonai vayili, Yeshua v'shaftamayim besason, mimaynei Yeshua, l'Adonai Yeshua, halamecha v'irchatecha sela, Adonai tzivahot imanu. Miskav lanu Elohei Yaakov Selah, Adonai Tzivahot Asher Adam Moteach Bach, Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yaneinu Yom Koreinu LaYehudim HaTorah Vesimcha v'sason vikar kein tieladu kosi Yeshu hotesa uv'shem Adonai ekra yainanai yanenai nainai yainanai yanenai nainai sabri Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei Priya Kafen, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei minei besamim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei meorei ha'esh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Hamavdil ben kodesh lecho, ben or lecho, shech ben Yisrael ha'amim, ben yom ha'shvihi, l'shishitim le'hamaseh, Baruch atah Adonai, Hamavdil ben kodesh lecho. Let's hear the sizzle. Oh, there's no sizzle this week. Huh. Shavua tov, 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 Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishvi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, B'meira Yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David. A safe week, a good week, a healthy week, a good week for everyone. Peace and to every nation on earth, and most especially to those who are still held in captivity. May we wake up to a happier, healthier day tomorrow. Shavua tov, everybody. Oh, thank you. Thanks for sticking around.